Alright, Annika's asleep. Maya's accounted for. Varys is... doting on Escher? Zor and I... Lathander knows what. Maze, you're a good boy. Sleeping at the fire next to me. I'm going to read... What is this? War Against Azalin. I don't remember picking up this book. Who's the author? Okay, scratched out. Sure, why not? The only way to truly find out if this is for good or ill is to flip through. Alright. No, not that page. Oh, by Lathander, what did you do, Viking? Here we are. Aslan and von Zorovich in a tower. This might be useful.
The exact placement of the stones in this pattern is necessary to maintain the integrity and power of the spells, he said rather haughtily, as if I should know this fact. Your own facilities lack this. I am surprised you've accomplished as much as you have. It is not as though any of it is especially difficult for me, I murmured. Because the spells you have are not especially difficult. They tend toward action, not reaction, as would seem to be your intent with this project. The reaction we'll achieve here will be greater than any you've known before. One would hope so, considering the effort involved.
Why is the conversation end here? No. There has to be more. Come on. No. One of these mercenaries. What? Okay, faster. Please. I do not need to hear about that ever again in my life. Okay, maybe I should go back, not forward. Too far. Here we are. Study.
Why not test it yourself? I once asked when he gave me a sheet of fine vellum, the new spell he had composed, inscribed on it in gold lettering. I was to follow its instruction and see if it succeeded. It is too complicated for you to learn, he snapped back. Hardly. But I have never heard of any master of the art who was so willing to give his work to another to try. In all the dissertations, in the treaties I'd read, and according to the few people I'd spoken with on the subject, such deference was comparable to having someone substitute for you on your wedding night. Most spellcasters are bluntly penurious about sharing their secrets with any but their chosen apprentices, and even then are careful over how much they are willing to bestow when it comes to new castings. But Azalin seemed unconcerned with such restraints. I am busy enough with other projects, he said. I have taken it this far. Now it is your turn to convey it to completion or to failure. Execute the spell and then report to me the results. But until then, bother me not with your idle questions. Indeed, he was extremely busy laying the groundwork for our escape, so I pushed my puzzlement and annoyance aside for the moment. After all, I too had better ways to spend my nights than ponder all these eccentricities. As long as his peculiarities did not seem to be a threat to our balance of power, I was content to hold my questions for a more propitious occasion, though more often than not I simply forgot to raise them again.
Right. How odd that Father and von Zarovich working together so in tandem. I'm more confused, if anything. It oddly, every time we spoke about him or them to each other through me, it was very violent. I can still feel the blood coming out of my nose. Gross. Anyway, let's see. His book is rather large. It almost seems like it's out of print. Right. Alright, here we are. A few months later.
Over the dark winter months, I studied Azalin as he studied the books. Certainly, he must have returned the favor, for he was very interested in the history of Barovia and my place within it. When he wasn't in one of his superior moods, he would ply me with questions about this point or that, always the ones not covered in the official histories of Barovia, which I filled in as best as memory would allow. He was particularly interested in the bloodletting ceremony I'd performed to take possession of Castle Ravenloft, along with the rest of the country. It is a very ancient custom, I told him, in response to a question he put to me on the subject one especially chill evening. Though unable to feel the cold, I had a great blaze going in the library fireplace to take the damp from the air, as well as to add to the lighting of the chamber. We worked on opposite sides of my vast study table on the preparation of future magical experimentation. Each of us had pen, ink, and parchment at hand to make notes, and between us lay a formidable collection of bottles and jars containing an assortment of rare ingredients necessary to the spell Azalin had in mind to try. Outside, an utterly freezing wind blew steadily and strongly through the towers and battlements of the castle. I was thankful not to have to be abroad on wing or afoot in search of food. Having supped in the dungeons already, Azalin was not given to any form of socializing or making idle questions for the sake of conversation, so I assumed he had some hidden purpose of his own in trying to draw me out of this, and cautiously played along. The ritual has been modified and gentled over the centuries, I continued. In the dim times before history was properly recorded, the ceremony was said to be a much more strenuous observance.
Most things were, he observed. Our progenitors often went to great lengths to portray themselves as being an improvement over the previous order.
That is the way of things, but only if they were vain enough to bother.
Not so much vanity as an easier means of placating the rabble if the new ruler is viewed as being better than what came before. Then maintaining control over them is one less concern for him to deal with.
Particularly if it's the truth. Was that the case with your own rule?
Mine is a hereditary office. But it was true. I was looked on as a savior to the land. Indeed, as an extension of the land itself. I brought order and the word of my law to the chaos I found, winning the favorable acclaim of everyone there.
Not everyone if you were forced to flee into the mists. I absolutely could not resist throwing the imaginary gauntlet on the floor between us. He told me very little about the exact circumstances that compelled him to blindly run into the mists, seeking refuge and finding entrapment. But I knew enough to be able to prod him about it, and perhaps by his reaction, learn more. That he was unpopular with at least some portion of his people, I had no doubt. His personality was not such as to inspire unconditional love and loyalty even from the most simple-minded of traditionalists.
Those traitors were an aberration,
he said, all righteous disdain. Yet their numbers must have been great for them to dare to challenge you.
Numbers are no match for sheer foolishness of intent. The greater the fools, the greater their delusion. They could truly harm me, had I but a few more moments of time to plan a course of action. Things would have gone quite differently for me. In order to gain that time, I had to seek concealment in the mists, and you know the rest.
One's enemies are rarely accommodating to one's needs. Had they been planning this assault against you for long? Before answering, he took time to write something onto his top sheet of parchment.
They did not precisely confide me the workings of their plans.
You must have had some hint. Usurping a throne, no matter how minor, is not a light task.
I didn't rule some petty principality,
he snarled. He gave a slight lift to his chin, a sneer curling the edge of his mouth, and if I read the meaning aright, the implication was that Barovia was just such a place. I held my face in blandly amused expression, which seemed to annoy him. Barovia might be small compared to what he had left behind, but at the moment it was the only place around, which made it the center of all existence for us both.
If any hint of their intent had come to me earlier, I would have dealt with it then,
he added. But there was a defensive tone, albeit a highly suppressed one, in his harsh voice. I had, it seemed, stung a tender spot. No doubt, I said. Happily, such problems don't plague me here. I can count on the loyalty of my subjects.
Even the ones in your dungeons?
They forsook any privilege of my protection when they broke my law. But their crimes have to do with murder and thievery and the like, not treason. Treason is not unknown here, but it is very rare. I haven't seen a case of it in some 200 years.
Then you are a most fortunate ruler. That or your people have no spirit to them.
To this blatant insult, I simply smiled, or rather, showed my teeth. They have spirit enough. Their blood is hearty, with the very life of the land beneath them.
And if my reading on the subject is correct, then you are yourself part of the land?
What do you mean?
The possession ceremony,
he prompted.
Does it mean they feed as much from you as you do from them?
Only in a philosophical sense, and I have no desire to put much effort in such musings. This ceremony was for the sake of symbol only. The meaning is to indicate that by binding my blood to the land, I will willingly defend it from all invaders.
Yes, I have seen how you have dealt with past intruders. I suppose I should count myself fortunate you did not attempt the same policy with me.
Emphasis on the word attempt, hardly subtle of him. The others were the same as the filth in my dungeons, deserving of their fate.
But I was an exception.
Because you chose not to violate my laws and wisely sought my protection. Here followed a long silence on his part. I glanced up at him from tipping some spider dust into a small measuring spoon. Aslan's face was quite unreadable, yet the impression I got had to do with strongly repressed anger. The only obvious sign of his inner agitation was the way his gloved fingers clenched a bottle full of rat's blood, as though to break it. With me suddenly looking on, he immediately relaxed his grip and kept quite still. But he could not hide the searing fire in his red, glazed eyes. Another tender spot stung. I pretended not to notice, though it was a solid confirmation to me of something I'd long surmised based upon how my own reaction would be. Were our positions reversed? I was thankful that they were not, for he would not have been so kind a host to me. But you were asking me about the origins of the ceremony, were you not? He made no reply. I continued. That in which I engaged was much more restrained than past efforts, if one is to believe the early historians and earlier legends. In very ancient times, a new ruler was expected to provide a much greater blood sacrifice to mark the occasion.
Such as?
He asked after a moment, having apparently mastered himself. Oh, animals large and small, anything from birds to bullocks, the number varied. It all varied according to the specific culture involved or the whim of the ascending monarch. I suppose it made it convenient to the cooks, providing them with the necessary supplies of meat for a celebratory feast afterwards.
So long as the animal in question was edible, how did human bloodletting come into it?
Of that I have no knowledge. But again, it depended on the culture involved. Some forms were no more than that. Form involving only a symbolic sacrifice and simply acting. Others were much more graphic, requiring the actual taking of a life.
Not the life of the ruler?
Sometimes that was done.
You jest!
Anger of a different sort from him now, and for once not aimed at me. Refreshing that. It was understandably uncommon, but not unheard of. If the priests of that ruler's faith were up to the task, then they would be able to resuscitate the corpse soon after. If life was restored, then it was seen as a sign from the gods that the right person was on the throne. His hands were steady as he poured dried beetles into a large mortar and began grinding them into dust with a pestle. But there was an abstracted air about him. It would have been interesting to find out what he was really thinking about beyond the needs of his work.
Foolishness,
he finally grunted. One may assume that those whose faith was somewhat questionable were careful to either make sure the priests were wholly loyal or willing to do some pretending themselves by faking the ceremony. It was from this I rather suspect the custom grew of turning into an act rather than genuine sacrifice.
I would have abolished such mummery altogether.
For you are accustomed to more enlightened behavior. Others' ancestors were often raised in a brutal world and had to abide by its brutal decrees.
Which may be changed if one is strong enough to the task.
Not without difficulty. The broad fact is that the bulk of the population of any one country is likely to be under-re-educated in anything new. Therefore, they cling most determinedly to the little they do know, for the unfamiliar is a threat. And the familiar, no matter how absurd we may see it to be, is their greatest comfort.
To bow before the pressure of the ignorant is weakness.
not bow. Employ it to one's own ends. Hence my willingness to proceed with the ceremony when I took up my rule. It was a trivial thing to me after all, a moment stinging from the knife cut, the reciting of a few words, then a healer to knit the skin together again. But the impact of this upon the common folk was all important. To them it was meant I was bound to the land as their protector for all my life.
But would you have been willing to sacrifice your life for the sake of possessing the land as they did of old? Trusting the priest to bring you back?
Of course I'd have done so. Back then I would have. Now that ploy might be more difficult to carry out. He seemed mightily surprised.
You would have been mad then!
Hardly. I was on the battlefield each day, and subject to the same peril of sudden death as any in my army. At any time I could have been killed in the struggle to obtain the rule of Barovia, and perhaps the priest could not have brought me back. But that the threat did not deter me from my goal. I would have done no less in facing the feeble requirements of political protocol.
Your determination must have been very great.
It still is. The land is mine. I thought he might want to debate that point, but he eschewed the opening for a slight turning in the topic.
So, though much mitigated from the past barbarities of custom, the cutting of your wrist and letting the blood flow onto the earth was a powerful symbol.
Indeed, or else it would not be a part of the ritual. My court at that time had been very concerned with such trivialities. Now nearly all of it was forgotten.
Symbol is the very heart of spell work, he continued,
now as if instructing a slow student, and stating that which was as familiar to me as my own skin.
Had you been casting a spell at the time, it would have been effectively bound to the land.
I was bound already to word and deed. No magic was necessary. It was but a formality. Something to give work to the scribes.
There is much to it than that. In all your time here, you must surely have noticed how the weather reacts to your state of mind.
I dismissed the idea with a wave. Mere coincidence. I rather think it is the other way around, the same as for most people. And actually, he did have a point. I'd long noticed how the weather often reflected my strongest emotion, with storms, clear skies, or biting winds. The mists, of course, were quite something else again. Perhaps I could have admitted to it, but I had good reason to always lead him into underestimating me.
What about this second ceremony, though?
He asked. Second ceremony?
The one performed with the Belverzi knife.
Where did you read of that? The incident was not in the official record. I pretended to search the table for something, hoping my reaction was casual.
I found it in the appendices of two different histories. One was a mere reference. The other had a more detailed account of how you foiled an assassination plot against you, but not before being wounded by the culprit's knife, then repeating the ritual words as you bled.
He wounded me slightly, with only a scratch along my ribs. Damned historians, they never do get things right.
And the repeating of the words?
They had been my antic humor getting the better of me. That had been my antic humor getting the better of me. The witnesses to what had happened in the castle garden had been so wide-eyed and in awe that I had given into temptation and shocked them even more.
What happened?
He pressed. I took possession of the knife. No others were willing to touch it. A moment later, I cut myself on the hand by accident, forgetting how sharp the blade was.
By accident? I do not believe in them. Not when it comes to magic.
Believe as you like. I was growing irritated at the direction he was taking.
But it was a magical knife. And you spoke the ritual words. Perhaps, far back in the darks of time, they were truly magical in origin.
I did, and I see where you wish to go with this and concede the possibility of a connection. I think it most unlikely, though. Why should it even interest you?
Because if your tie to the land is too strong, then you may never be able to escape Barovia.
I met this statement with a long silence and a stony face. What is his game, was my first thought. Was he trying to prepare me for a future failure in this proposed escape? If he broke free of this plane and left me behind, I would not be able to do a damn thing to stop him. Not unless I watched him much more closely than I was already.
Of course, there may be ways around such a tie,
he added. If it exists.
I have no doubt that it does. I'm thinking that if you have any valedictory ritual that we can employ, it might serve to negate that tie you established at the time, freeing you to escape.
I had a mental picture of him holding out the carrot with his right hand, and the instant I took it, I would discover the stunning effect of the stick hidden in his left. Such a ritual as he conjectured existed, but to initiate it was not a light matter. As though hearing my very thoughts, he went on.
In fact, a severance might be absolutely necessary for our success.
All those questions about the country and its history made great sense, if they were part of his first step towards supplanting me. But even if he had no ambition to take my place, how could I truly sever myself from Barovia? I longed to leave it and be free, but not forever. Tatiana was here. I could never abandon her, and should I perform such a separation ceremony, it might also end any hope of me finding her again. I shall investigate the idea, I said, trying to sound indifferent. And I would, exhaustively, before making so irrevocable a decision.
Excellent!
He sounded most pleased with himself, which did nothing to negate my distrust of him, but I promised nothing. He made a slight gesture of dismissal as though to belie the importance of the subject.
Now, about this other incident concerning your brother and his bride.
A family tragedy that I would prefer not to go into, I said shortly, growing tired of his delving. His gaunt face gave away nothing, but his mouth did twitch. He knew he had finally stung me in turn. He repeated the dismissive gesture.
Perhaps another time then. The night is passing and we should be at work.
Really? That's it? That's the end of the story? What? No, that can't be. There was more pages. What? What? No. Maybe it'll come back another day. Feels like it was such a long story too, and so much to learn. All I can say is, Von Zarevich was a lot more calculating than I thought he was, and I already thought he was quite calculating. Makes me also say, Fuck you, Zoranai. If I had to go back into Castle Ravenloft one more fucking time to drag your goddamn fucking corpse out because you wanted to have some fucking tea time with him, I would be fucking livid! Anyway, good night, Mez. Sweet dreams.